ability to support Ukraine indefinitely and uncritically, suspending national politics as usual, is fraying.
Well, we're joined now from Spain by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the exiled Belarus opposition leader. In the studio, Alyssa de Carbonell, the Deputy Programme Director for Europe of the and Central Asia at the Crisis Group, and Colonel Daniel Davis, a former Pentagon staff officer from Washington and critic of the current policy, one might say, is also joining us on the line. But let's go first to Svetlana. You tweeted today that the attack in Kharkiv, with this heavy loss of life, served as a reminder of the need for Western commitment. Does that mean you're worried that it can't be taken for granted now, that it might be fraying?
Belarus, we have to look at Belarus as not only as problem, but also as part of solution. Changes in Belarus can help Ukraine to win the war, and changes in Belarus can spark unrest in Russia too. That we must understand that without democratic Belarus, Europe will never be safe and will be always source of threats.
OK. You met the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, today, and he said today, as it happens, that if there are problems in the US with the provision of further aid for Ukraine, Europe can't fill the gap. It just seems like potentially there's a little bit of creaking in the alliance, that the previous assumptions that commitment could be taken as read might not be quite so safe now. Does that worry you?
No, of course, we are, as Belarusian people who are supporting Ukraine as much as we can, understand that only unity and joint position towards supplies of weapons to Ukraine will help Ukrainians actually to win. So that's why I'm really afraid of, fatigue or crack or split of opinion about supplies to Ukraine, because Ukrainians now are fighting not only for themselves, they are actually fighting for the security of the whole region. And democratic countries, powerful countries, has to show its teeth. Democracy has teeth, but let's stay united opposing the regime.
And obviously for you, coming from Belarus, the attitude of the Polish government neighbouring there is very important. What do you think of the recent actions by the government there, quotas on Ukrainian grain exports and saying they would stop arms shipments to Ukraine?
I think that since the beginning of the war, Poland was one of the most decisive countries in the support for Ukraine. So maybe it is a political misunderstanding, but I really doubt that Poland will stop supporting Ukraine, because Poland has done so much. They accepted so many Ukrainian refugees. They supplied so many weapons to Ukraine, because Ukraine and Poland has a common border, and it's in the interest of Poland, of course, that Ukraine will win this war.
You've had your own experience of dealing with Western countries since the election was stolen in your own country, in Belarus, by President Lukashenko. What does that tell you about Western countries' attention span, the ability to get access to decision makers? How long does it last in a crisis, do you think?
So first of all, ask you not to call Lukashenko president. He's not. He's a person who seized power in the country, and with the help of terror and tyranny and support of Putin, he's still there. So yeah. So many things can be done by European Union, the USA, to help our region. I'm here on behalf of Belarus, and I ask you to keep Belarus high on the agenda, to impose devastating sanctions on the regime, its cronies, its assets, assist democratic forces, free media and civil society. We are not asking to fight instead of us, and Ukrainians are not asking to fight instead of them. We're just asking democratic, powerful countries to help us to win this war against imperial ambitions of Russia. And I think that Europe and the USA have power, have bravery, and have decisiveness, to end this war together with us.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, let's now go to Alyssa de Carbonell in the studio. Look, I suppose there's various ways you could see what's going on at the moment. Perhaps a return to politics as usual for Slovakia or Poland or Hungary or some of these other countries that have been cavilling in a way at supporting Ukraine. Is that right? Is it perhaps that the effect of having to stay unified alongside Ukraine is wearing off, or is there something else going on, do you think?
Well, I think from the very beginning, Ukraine has been fighting a battle on two fronts, right? On the battlefield, and it is incredibly dependent on Western support and has become only more so, including to keep its government ticking and running, right? So for the budget, not just for weapons and supplies. I think, part of what we're seeing now, and there's always been horse trading over sanctions and discussions, unity is still there for the majority. It should be said that the policy hasn't shifted greatly in capitals. This is still a minority view that is kind of talking about cutting support or looking for ways to barter. But certainly the counteroffensive itself, the hype around it, the stakes around it, and then the disappointment that it hasn't really delivered as much as some people expected, is sort of fueling a renewed debate right now.
Well, let's go to Daniel Davis in Washington, because definitely we see some of that upset about the counteroffensive in reporting from Washington. And of course, we've also had this situation in the gridlock in the House of Representatives there, where $6 billion in aid to Ukraine has, for the moment, been taken out of the budget, but the White House saying it's hoping to get that money through by other means. Do you think the White House is misreading things?
Well, no, I don't think they're misreading anything. I think they're very clear-eyed that there is a real problem in the Congress, specifically in the House of Representatives. And President Biden said yesterday that he's about to announce a speech where he's going to announce some ways that he can try to go around Congress. But look, the way that our country is set up there, Congress has the purse string. So the president may have some flexibility here to move money from one account to another. I will have to wait and see what he has in mind. But there is a very real issue in the House of Representatives about continued giving money. And Jim Jordan, who's probably the leading candidate to become the next speaker, was very clear today and very emphatic when he says, look, before we give any more money, I want to hear from the White House what the plan is, what the strategy is, and how this is going to end up in a positive way for the United States. And that is really the core issue here. And when you see that this counteroffensive that the Ukraine has launched after 6 months of preparation and now 4 months of execution, you see that it has hardly scratched the surface, and there is no viable military path for Ukraine to succeed in driving Russia out when they barely dented just the first line of defense in one major area. So the valid question is, why should we keep giving money, tanks, ammunition that are depleting our own stocks in the West, not just the U.S., when it's probably not going to make any difference on the battlefield? And so far, it hasn't. And I think that those are questions that many capitals are starting to ask in a little bit more emphatic way.
All right. Well, let's come back to Alyssa on that point. And you also mentioned the fact there hasn't, at least so far, been any kind of breakthrough or significant advance in the counteroffensive. But presumably we're now in a bit of a replay of the late summer and autumn last year, where the Ukrainian requests came in. They've already been talking today about anti-aircraft missiles to defend their skies during the coming months, but also presumably for ammunition and supplies for a new campaign in the spring. Is that realistic, do you think? Do you think European countries will be as forthcoming as they were last winter with sending in those supplies?
So there's a real question now over ammunition, availability of supplies, how countries are making decisions about those resources. You mentioned Poland. The decision there was about new arms being for deterrence in Poland, not a question of not sending or having sent supplies. So, the stocks are really empty, and there's a question of how much ammunition Ukraine has left after this counteroffensive. But just to come back to something that's been said in the program, I think, there is a debate going on now, and that's well and good. We live in democracies, and there needs to be a case made for the war in Ukraine. Unfortunately, that is already sending a message to Russia that its strategy and its thinking that it can outlast the West and kind of keep going in this war because Western support for Ukraine will fall apart is already doing damage and is already sort of reaffirming that message and undermining Western deterrence and Ukraine's own battle.
Does that worry you, Daniel Davis, that perhaps setting the kind of yardsticks that you were talking about previously for Ukraine will give Vladimir Putin just the encouragement he needs to think the end is in sight?
Well, look, I don't think that he needs any encouragement. I mean, the stakes have been clear for quite a long time. I've argued on your network here many times, long before this offensive started, that there were no military fundamentals that should allow Ukraine to continue to win, that they would not be able to win no matter how many tanks, planes, artillery shells that we gave, because the military combat fundamentals do not weigh in their favor. And none of that has changed. In fact, it's actually gotten worse because the Russian side has improved. It's gotten stronger while the Ukraine side has gone down. So what needs to happen is we need to just come to an acceptance of there's some reality here that we can't just spin away. We can't wish them away. And the longer we keep going to that, we actually play into Putin's hands, and it makes it worse for the people of Ukraine and rises their casualties. And that's my biggest concern, is that we're not willing to acknowledge just basic on-the-ground reality, and we're still trying to pursue objectives that just aren't going to be achieved, I'm afraid.
Lieutenant Colonel Davis, Alicia de Carbonell, thank you both indeed very much. Well, we will undoubtedly come back to the Ukraine story.